It was one of those evenings that started like any other, but ended in a way I'll never forget. The sun was dipping low, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and the air had that calm, quiet feeling that comes just before nightfall. I was walking home from the grocery store, my arms weighed down with bags filled with the usual: bread, milk, a few snacks for the week. I wasn't in any hurry, I was just enjoying the peacefulness of the neighborhood. But that peace didn't last long. Up ahead, I heard raised voices. At first, I thought it was just someone arguing, maybe a couple having a disagreement. But as I got closer, I realized it was something much worse. There was a black woman standing on the sidewalk, her back straight, but her face full of fear. In front of her was a police officer, his face twisted with anger, yelling at her to comply and stop resisting. My stomach dropped. She wasn't resisting. She wasn't doing anything wrong. She was just standing there, trying to explain herself. But he wasn't listening. I stopped in my tracks, my heart pounding. I wanted to help, but I didn't know what to do. I felt frozen, caught between the urge to step in and the fear of what might happen if I did. The officer's voice was loud and harsh, his words cutting through the air like a knife. He stepped closer to her, his hand hovering near his belt, and I felt a chill run down my spine. This wasn't right. This wasn't how someone in authority should be acting. The woman tried to speak, her voice steady but trembling. "I didn't do anything wrong," she said, her words clear and strong, despite the fear in her eyes. But the officer didn't care. He grabbed her arm, roughly yanking her toward him. She cried out in pain, and I felt my own breath catch in my throat. This was escalating too fast, and I was powerless to stop it. But then, just as I thought things couldn't get any worse, two men appeared out of nowhere. They were dressed in suits, and they moved with a confidence that immediately caught my attention. One of them held up a badge, his voice calm but firm as he stepped between the officer and the woman. "That's enough," he said. "Step back." The officer hesitated, his grip on the woman's arm loosening. He looked confused, maybe even a little intimidated. The men in suits didn't raise their voices, but their presence was enough to make him pause. They weren't there to argue or negotiate. They were there to protect, and it was clear they weren't going to back down. The woman stepped back, her hands shaking as she rubbed her arm where the officer had grabbed her. One of the men in suits turned to her, his voice soft but steady. "Are you okay?" he asked. She nodded, but I could see the tears welling up in her eyes. She was relieved, but the shock and pain of what had just happened were written all over her face. The officer muttered something under his breath, his face red with embarrassment or anger. I couldn't tell which. He took a step back, then another, before finally turning and walking away. The tension in the air slowly began to fade, but the weight of what had just happened stayed with me. I stood there, my groceries forgotten, feeling a mix of emotions I couldn't quite put into words. Anger at the injustice, sadness for the woman, and gratitude for those two men who had stepped in when it mattered most. As I finally continued my walk home, my mind was racing. Who was that woman? Why were those men protecting her? I didn't have any answers, but I knew one thing for sure. What I had witnessed was wrong. No one should ever be treated that way, especially by someone who's supposed to protect and serve. It was a stark reminder of how much work still needs to be done, how far we still have to go to make sure everyone is treated with dignity and respect. That moment stayed with me long after I got home. It changed the way I see the world. It made me realize how important it is to stand up for what's right, even when it's scary. It reminded me that kindness and courage can make a difference, even in the darkest moments. And it showed me that sometimes help comes from the most unexpected places, just in time. I don't know what happened to that woman after that day, but I hope she's okay. I hope she knows that there are people out there who care, who will stand up for her when she needs it most. And I hope that officer learned something from what happened, though I'm not sure he did. All I know is that I'll never forget what I saw, and I'll do my best to make sure I'm never just a bystander again. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. I unpacked my groceries, my hands still trembling slightly as I put things away. I tried to distract myself with the TV, but I couldn't focus. My mind kept going back to that moment on the sidewalk, to the look on that woman's face, to the way the officer had treated her. It wasn't fair. It wasn't right. I thought about the men in suits too. Who were they? Secret Service? Private security? I didn't know, but I was grateful for them. They had stepped in when no one else would, when I couldn't. They had done what was right, and it made me wonder if I would have the courage to do the same if I were ever in their shoes. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't sleep. My mind was still racing, replaying the scene over and over again. I thought about the woman, about what she must have been feeling, about how scared she must have been. I thought about the officer, too, and how someone in a position of power could act that way. It made me angry, but it also made me sad. How many times had something like this happened when no one was around to step in? How many people had been treated unfairly, their voices silenced, their pain ignored? I made a promise to myself that night. I promised that I would never just stand by and watch something like that happen again. I promised that I would do whatever I could to stand up for what's right, even if it was scary, even if it was hard. I didn't know how I would do it, but I knew I had to try. That moment on the sidewalk changed me. It opened my eyes to the injustices that still exist in the world, but it also showed me the power of kindness and courage. It reminded me that even in the darkest moments, there is hope. And it taught me that sometimes, all it takes is one person, or two, to make a difference. I'll never forget that woman, or the men who stepped in to protect her. They reminded me of what it means to be human, to care for one another, to stand up for what's right. And they showed me that no matter how dark things may seem, there is always light to be found, if we're brave enough to look for it. Hey everyone, if this story moved you, if it made you think, or if it reminded you why we need to keep having these conversations, please take a moment to like this video. It really helps spread awareness. I'd love to hear your thoughts, so drop a comment below. Have you ever witnessed or experienced something like this? Let's talk about it. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be told, make sure to subscribe to the channel. We're here to share real, powerful stories that need to be heard. Lastly, share this with your friends and family. The more people who see this, the more we can bring awareness and change. Thank you for watching and being part of this journey. Let's keep pushing forward, together.